Before his brutal murder, Robert Schwartz was highly successful and well known in the scientific community. After his wife passed away, he was left a single father to 3 children: Jesse, Catherine Michelle, and the youngest, Clara Jane. It was the 8th of December 2001 when a car full of people arrived outside the farmhouse in Virginia where Robert lived. The driver was 21-year-old Michael Fole, and his 2 passengers were his girlfriend, 19-year-old Catherine Inglis, and Kyle Holbert, an 18-year-old friend of Clara Jane's. Clara herself was not in the car. She had chosen to remain in her dorm at college while Michael, Catherine, and Kyle made the journey without her. Kyle had met 20-year-old Clara at a Renaissance festival earlier that same year, and the two had quickly bonded over their mutual love of role-playing games, the goth culture, fantasy, and the occult. They were both fascinated with magic, but by many accounts, Kyle had taken this a step too far. He was diagnosed with both bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, which blurred the lines of reality for him and sometimes made him believe that he was much more powerful than he was. In fact, before meeting Clara, he had been a psychiatric patient a total of 7 times for his paranoid delusions and suicidal tendencies. In Kyle's head, he was a warrior, and his role was to protect Clara Jane, who he'd quickly become very close to. He described Clara as his closest, most dear friend, and a sister as well. Clara, who studied computer science at James Madison University, was known on campus as someone who both dressed and acted in an alternative way. She was into the goth fashion and referred to herself as the nickname Priestess of High Chaos. This was thought to be a reference to the works of fantasy writer H.P. Lovecraft. In particular, the Cthulhu mythos, where chaos magicians are magic-wielding individuals who don't follow a particular moral code or set of rules. For chaos magicians, their only belief is that nothing is true and everything is permitted. This meant that, in her own eyes and Kyle's eyes, there were no boundaries to Clara's power. When Kyle approached the door of the farmhouse on the cold, rainy night of December 8th, Robert Schwartz recognized the teenager as a friend of his daughter's and invited him inside. Shortly afterwards, Kyle revealed the 2-foot-long sword that he had brought with him. Quote, "I know about your plans," he said. "You won't get away with it." He then stabbed and slashed at Robert more than 40 times, fatally injuring him. Leaving Robert's mutilated body where it fell, Kyle walked back to the car, where Catherine cleaned the blood off the sword and wrapped the weapon in a towel. It took 2 days for the crime to be discovered. Police were aware that an unknown person had made a call to a tow truck company in the same window of time that Robert had been killed, and the caller's car had been parked close to the farmhouse. As well as this, phone records showed that Clara had called Kyle shortly before her father was killed, although Clara had lied to the police, telling them that she had not made or received any phone calls that night. There was one other thing that Clara couldn't or wouldn't explain to the police. It was a note in her dorm room addressed to the pseudonyms that she, Kyle, Michael, and Catherine used in their role-playing games, asking for true honor to be bestowed upon their souls by High Chaos. Investigators believed that the note was a thank you to her friends for carrying out the murder. The car's driver was quickly identified as Michael Fole, and police ordered Michael, Catherine, and Kyle to come in for questioning. During Catherine's interrogation with law enforcement, she made several statements that implied that Robert's own daughter, Clara Jane, had been involved in the planning of his murder. According to Catherine, Clara had discussed killing Robert on multiple occasions, reportedly because Clara believed that her father had tried to poison her, as well as domestically abusing her. Above all else, Clara's motive for wanting her father dead was incredibly shallow. The two of them just didn't get along that well. He didn't like the alternative goth clothing that she wore, and he didn't approve of the fact that she spent so much time alone in her room role-playing and shutting herself away from the real world. On the 2nd of February 2002, Clara Jane Schwartz was officially indicted for her father Robert's murder and also faced charges for both solicitation of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Catherine, Michael, and Kyle were also indicted for their involvement in the killing. Kyle's family members were devastated, believing that their mentally ill son had been taken advantage of and manipulated. They described the hallucinations that Kyle suffered from, as well as his suicidal ideation and desire to be accepted by others. His mother said, quote, "If Kyle sees someone who needs something, if he can, he gives it to them." Out of the 4 accomplices, Clara was the only one to go to trial. The prosecution described Clara as the ringleader of the group, a young woman who was not afraid to manipulate others to get what she wanted. And in this case, what she wanted was her father's death. She had previously tried to have Robert killed by instructing one of her other friends to murder him, but this plan had failed. According to prosecutors, Clara hated her father so much that when the initial plan didn't come to fruition, she immediately began to concoct a second plan to have him killed. And that's how Kyle Holbert became involved. Both of Clara's siblings made statements about how their father's murder had affected their lives. Her brother, 25-year-old Jesse, told the jury that he couldn't escape from daily thoughts of his father being brutally killed on his sister's orders. Clara's older sister, Michelle, shared that she now had a fear of knives and suffered from nightmares where she's forced to watch her father die. Michelle said, quote, "It's been nothing but a nightmare since the day I found out. It's hard enough that it was my father, but on top of that, to have my sister committing such a horrible crime." Both the prosecution and defense leaned heavily on Clara's obsession with a role-playing game called Underworld. According to prosecutors, Underworld had played a large role in Clara convincing Kyle to carry out the murder. But the defense disagreed, saying that Clara's instructions for her father's murder had been given in the context of role-playing. Kyle had been the one to take the game too far by attacking and killing Robert in real life. The prosecution's rebuttal against this claim relied on a specific witness, Patrick, the friend of Clara's who she had previously asked to murder her father. Patrick took to the stand and shared with the jury that Clara was obsessed with the idea of murdering her father, talked often about the large sum of money she would inherit from his will, and on multiple occasions, she had researched natural toxins and chemicals that she could use to cause his death without suspicion. Patrick had taken part in Underworld role-playing with Clara, where he had played the role of an assassin. Clara's character had asked Patrick's character to assassinate her father. It didn't take long for the jury to come to their conclusion. On the 15th of October 2002, Clara Jane Schwartz was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to a 48-year prison sentence. Since then, she's tried to appeal her conviction or shorten her sentence on many different occasions. But for now, her release date is set at November 2nd, 2043. As the accomplice who actually carried out the murder, and with an actual sword, no less, Kyle Holbert received a life sentence without parole. Kyle's lawyer gave a statement to the public shortly after his sentence was revealed, where he said Clara was the puppet master and Kyle Holbert was the puppet. A people pleaser until the end, Kyle had elected to plead guilty to the charges against him so that Clara's family would not have to go through the trauma of sitting through a second trial. Michael Foale was sentenced to 18 years in prison, and Catherine Inglis received the shortest sentence of the group, only 1 year of jail time for conspiracy to commit murder. Clara Jane's grandfather and Robert's father summed up Clara's actions perfectly in just one sentence. She had free choice, he said, and her choices were always the bad ones. That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast today. It's a big deal to me. It might not seem like a big deal for you, I'm sure. Just a few minutes out of your day. But for me, it's something that I put a lot of time and work into, and money, I guess. I have to spend actual money to make this happen. It takes a lot for me to do it, and I really appreciate the fact that that's not in vain. This podcast continues to grow. There's a little community of people that listen to the episodes and are like the nicest people in the world. You guys are like the nicest people I've ever encountered in my life, and I really appreciate that. If this is your first time listening to 10 Minute Murder, please subscribe now so that you can catch up on all the back episodes and never miss any of the new ones. Connect with me on social media to see the visuals that we're talking about here on the podcast. It's nothing gross. It's nothing graphic. I don't want to see that. And I just assume that you don't either. If you do, you can always Google these images and find them yourself. I'll let you handle that. But all the other ones, you can find them anywhere that you can find 10 Minute Murder on social media. If you like this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple or any place that's possible. Your positive feedback is very much appreciated. Go to 10minutemurder.com for all things 10 Minute Murder.